All right, class, this is it. The final short presentation to summarize our class on healthcare policy. And we'll focus tonight on the importance of positive deviance in the healthcare world. So, something you'll realize when you become a professional, whatever you become a professional in, I spend a lot of my time in two worlds, higher education and healthcare. And I see it all the time in these two worlds. You'll see them in law, engineering, business. You choose it. You'll see this pattern that people will get to a certain point of proficiency or excellence, and then it's good enough, and they won't keep pushing. Like once you get good enough, it's good enough. And what you see a lot of times, and what has always sort of scared me, I hope it doesn't happen to me, I'm trying to push so it doesn't, is they stop trying to get better. They get good enough, and good enough's good enough, so that's it. And that's not great for clinicians, and it's not great for educators. We should always be trying to get better. It's really important. And so one of the methods of making improvements that are otherwise difficult is the concept of positive deviance, that this school of thought that says there are people who are in the same settings you are and have the same resource constraints, and yet they have found clever, innovative, anomalous ways to solve a problem or get better. And it's just a matter of finding those people, finding coaches, finding the positive deviant anomalies in our society in every area. Students in dorms who have figured things out that other students haven't figured out, faculty members who figured out different teaching techniques, nurses and doctors and other allied health professionals who found clever ways to reduce virus transmissions. And you don't need to reinvent the wheel. That's why this picture comes with the article on positive deviance. You just have to have a clever way through data collection and analysis and interviews and qualitative and quantitative analysis to find these people who have figured things out. And because the goal of all of this is, in life, and we're living through this right now, you're trying to change people's behavior on vaccines, on hand washing, on social distancing. You're trying to get people to do things that are healthier and better for themselves individually, but also even more so for all of our safety. And so the most common approach to changing behavior is to say to people, please wash your hands, please stay at home, please apply to continue learning in your professional field. Please learn new techniques. And that works reasonably well, as you're also seeing in our country right now and other places, asking people to stay home, asking people to refrain from doing their normal activities because it's not safe, doesn't always work well. And there are people who will resist that. So please do X gets you a little bit, but not as much as you like. Then there's the law and order approach. You must do X. You must stay at home. You must wash your hands. You must get the vaccine. You must wear masks. You must do contact tracing. You must not do these activities. And that works pretty well too, but there are limits to that. If you just keep doing law and order, people eventually tune you out, reject, or quit. So law and order will get you so much and so far, and asking people, please do this, will get you so far, but it's not good enough. The kinder version of you must do X is to offer incentives or penalties, sticks and carrots. And oh my gosh, so much of life is sticks and carrots. Please do X. You must do X. You must pay your taxes on time. You must submit your paperwork. You must pay your deposits. You must get your coursework done. As a professor, I feel like half my life is incentives and penalties. Here are papers you have to write, and then you get X letter grade and points towards your final grade. Here's your midterm. Here's your final exam. These are ways to incentivize students who've worked hard. You get high grades. You get commendations. Conversely, if you don't do the work, don't turn in the papers, you get penalties. And that's education. I get it. And then at a certain point, that's what you just have to do. That's what if you ever look at a syllabus is just a multi-page version of sticks and carrots to get you to do the work that we think you should do. But in a perfect or better world, not even a perfect world, a better world, it would be, here are all these cool articles and videos and documentaries and other learning materials. Please spend about 5-6 hours a week going over that, and we'll come to class and we'll talk about it. And what you really want in life is to get people so into what you're teaching or what you're doing that They do it because they want to do it. It's the social norm. That's the real goal of education. That's a real goal of any healthcare system, is to get people to do the right thing when nobody's watching, when there's no credit given, there's no reward or penalty. It's a change in the mores of our lives. Like another example is just put your seatbelt on, because it's the safe thing for you and for other people on the road. Before the 1980s, we thought that was impossible. People would never put their seatbelt on. We're too individualistic. They passed a law in New York, then it became a law in all the states in the 1980s, and now everybody pretty much wears their seatbelt. Now we're trying to say, look, don't use your phone in the car, put your phone away. And we can't always be there with a police officer to enforce it. So what you're trying to do with seatbelts and messages about not using handheld devices in cars is you're trying to get people to change their behavior when nobody's watching, which is most of the time. That's the real goal in life, is changing behavior when nobody's watching. And one of the most famous examples of discovering this and then disseminating this is called positive deviance. And Jerry and Monique Sternin, who were Boston-based child malnutrition experts, were contracted by the Vietnamese government in the early 1990s to come and address, if not solve, their child malnutrition problem. And they were child malnutrition experts. So they fly to Vietnam in the early 1990s to bring with them their Boston-based Ivy League model for addressing child malnutrition. And within a week or so, they realized they didn't know the culture, they didn't know the language, they didn't know the topography, they didn't know the history, they didn't know all the things that make child malnutrition unique in that sphere. Child malnutrition has certain attributes and characteristics everywhere, but how it plays out and how it's caused and how it's remedied and the backstory changes from place to place. And to their credit, as humbled as they were, they realized that while they couldn't solve it and their model didn't work, what they could do at a minimum was basically go out like census takers, anthropology census takers, and just document the extent of the problem and just collect as much data, qualitative and quantitative, as they could on child malnutrition in Vietnam, and at least present a compendium of data about the extent and the nature and the degree of the problem of child malnutrition in Vietnam. And it was in that moment that they stumbled onto the positive deviance model of change. What they found in village after village, as you read in the article, was that, yes, there was a lot of child malnutrition. And yet, interestingly, in every village, there was always a collection, a cohort of children who were poor, who should have fit the profile of their peers who were malnourished, but they weren't. And when they started seeing that pattern, they changed their research to go visit the homes of the children who were poor and who otherwise fit the profile of children who were going to be malnourished but weren't malnourished. And that's when they literally stumbled onto the answer. In the back of one of the rooms that they were doing field interviews with, a crab crawled out of a pot, and one of the parents saw that, rushed over, put the crab back in the pot, embarrassed. And the Sternins were just curious about what that was and why they rushed over and what was the embarrassment about. And the parents, through a set of questions, sort of conveyed that at the time in this region, crab meat and eating crabs was a form of it was a stigmatized food. It was a poor person's food, fed to poor children by poor parents. And so it had all of this stigma, which again, maybe for us in the United States, it's kind of hard because we all love crab meat and crab cakes, and that's kind of a delicacy. It's expensive. But in Vietnam, working in the fields, shrimp and especially crabs were abundant and free, but the people that would be collecting them and feeding them to their children were people who worked in those settings and who were lower income. And for the Sterners, they realized that was the solution. That was right there, the crab meat, which is a tremendous source of protein, was the hiding solution. It was the hidden solution to the child malnutrition problem. And it didn't require any external models or resources. The solution was literally at their feet, in the water, in the community, by people who themselves didn't even realize that they had stumbled onto it. They were glad their children weren't malnourished, but they didn't realize that was the reason. And for the Sternins, that's when they realized that's a better model for affecting consistent, reliable, sustainable, positive reforms and change. The positive deviance approach believes that people change when that change is distilled from concrete action steps. In other words, Coming in with a highfalutin PowerPoint and theories and all that, people don't change their behavior to that. But when they see their neighbor and they're informed that their neighbor's children are not malnourished because of a very simple, concrete step that their neighbors are doing, which is feeding their children crab meat, that affects change much, much quicker. It's easier. The Sternans realized and found that it's easier to act your way into a new form of thinking. It's easier to behave your way into a new philosophy than it is to change your philosophy and then have that translate into change behavior. Change your behavior first, then your philosophy, your mentality will change much quicker. Second, the positive deviance approach questions the traditional role of outside experts, believing that the wisdom to solve the problem lies inside. So often, and I've used this example, we can talk about mental distress among college students on college campuses. And while I follow this topic a lot and read everything I can get my hands on, and I give lectures that include whole sets of slides on anxiety and depression among college students, my coming to a dorm to give a little talk on college mental health might at best be mildly helpful. It might raise a little bit of awareness. I might put up some information about CAP centers and resources. But me talking, a middle-aged professor talking about college student mental distress is only going to get so far because I'm too far removed from the thing that I'm talking about. What is more likely to be much more helpful is a set of resident assistant RAs, somewhat older students, maybe some young alumni who have really spent a lot of time on this issue and have found very effective, affordable ways for students to improve their mental health. And when you look at them, they literally are your peers. And so that's a much, much more successful model of sharing information that leads to behavior change, that leads to better outcomes than when the outside expert comes into the dorm for one talk per semester or 1 year and then goes back to a very different world. I'm not likely to be very helpful. And this is also the third point. In the positive deviance approach, change is led by internal change agents, right? So the wisdom is in there, it's inside the dorm, it's inside the community in Vietnam, and it's by people who are peers. It's your fellow classmates, RAs, fellow parents in the village who stumble on to much better solutions to persistent, intractable problems. Now that was discovered by the Sternans in Vietnam, and then they developed the positive deviance approach, which has then been used in so many other settings, including in hospitals and hospital-acquired infections. MRSA is a real big problem in many hospitals. It's sort of an occupational hazard. And many years ago, about a decade ago, the Albert Einstein Medical Center was looking at the data of MRSA infections in their hospital. And they would, over time, see that they always had problems here and there of MRSA, breaking out. And so they would send in teams, wash your hands when you go in the room, wash your hands when you go outside the room. They would follow people. They would send out announcements, and they would get some level of improvement, but it wasn't sustained and it wasn't significant. And then as they were going over the data of MRSA infections, they kept finding that wherever this one hospital staff member, Jasper Palmer, wherever he had been working from floor to floor and unit to unit, wherever he was, the MRSA infections plummeted, went way down. And so they realized that something associated with him is what worked, is something. He's discovered something that is valuable. And so they started following Jasper Palmer around and collecting data on him. And that's when the Jasper Palmer method of gown and glove removal was discovered by a fellow staff member, no outside consultancy paid tens of thousands of dollars. The solution was inside the hospital. If they just collected the data and followed it and then followed Jasper, they had the solution and it was free. And then once all the other people in the hospital realized that their colleague, Jasper, had figured this out, it was so much easier for them to emulate his behavior. And I looked up on YouTube and I found the Jasper.
Hello, I'm Jasper Palmer from the Albert Einstein Medical Center Escort Department. I'm here to show you a simple technique of disposing of isolation gowns after contact in an isolated room. It's a method that's very simple. Notice. Noun has been inverted. Now I start to make a nice little ball. This prevents from air from getting in, making it too hard to handle. Nice slow roll, over and over.
His gloves are still on. This is key.
Observe the glove. Grasp in the middle. First one goes over the top. The second one goes over that, creating a nice little ball that you can now dispose of in the trash can, anywhere from 50 to 150 with low spillage. Thank you.
And that's it. In their midst, they had the person, the positive deviant, who had figured it out. And I'm not even sure he had figured out that he had discovered this, because why would he be constantly monitoring MRSA infections? That's someone else's job. He was just doing his job. But by looking for people like him, looking for anomalies in the data, they discovered that their MRSA reduction problem had a solution in the form of Jasper pollen. Now, another classic example of positive deviance addressing the biggest problem of infant mortality due to severe diarrhea is maybe the most successful non-governmental organization on the planet in terms of poverty reduction and health promotion, and that's the Bangladesh Rural Advancement Committee, otherwise known as BRAC. And BRAC became famous in the late 1970s, early 1980s. Now they're just famous for a lot of reasons. But they're sort of the way they got known to a lot of people in the public health world was they're the ones who discovered the way to make oral rehydration therapy very easy for anybody to make at home. Because before this, when children and adults came down with severe diarrhea due to things like cholera, you had to rush them to urban areas and hospitals for intravenous therapy, which requires an insertion in your arm and sterile liquids in a clinical setting. And in places like Bangladesh and rural parts of Bangladesh, that just wasn't possible. But researchers in Bangladesh associated with BRAC had discovered that there was another solution to treating this, and it's called oral rehydration therapy, and it's a half a liter of water mixed with a fistful of sugar and a pinch of salt. And then the challenge was, how do you get that information out to an entire country? But they did. They figured this out, and now it's a worldwide model of treating severe diarrhea in any setting. And I just want to show you this real quick, because once you see it, it's so clever. You literally can't forget it. I saw it one time many, many years ago, and I know the formula to this day. This is BRAC.
In 1970, a monstrous cyclone devastated what was then East Pakistan. 500,000 perished. Millions were destitute. Within months, a savage civil war erupted as the region fought for independence. In 1971, the nation of Bangladesh was born, but it was in shambles.
I went into an area which was extremely devastated. There was a lot of houses destroyed. Livestock was decimated. The farmers didn't have any plows. And that suddenly brought to me the extreme vulnerability of people in situations like this. And that's how BRAC was born.
Abed was an executive with Shell Oil, but he quit his job and recruited 24 young volunteers. They built houses, rehabilitated farmland. They established health clinics. In time, BRAC's mission shifted from disaster relief to long-term development. Then, Abed decided that BRAC should think big.
In 1979, it was the International Year of the Child, and we thought, what could we do to bring down child mortality in our country?
Nothing claimed more young lives than diarrhea, caused by waterborne diseases like cholera. Diarrhea kills through dehydration. The standard treatment, with intravenous fluids, was no option in communities with no health facilities. Ironically, researchers in Bangladesh had recently shown that dehydration could also be treated orally, with water mixed with salt and sugar. The added ingredients allow the body to absorb and replace lost fluids. Oral rehydration therapy was a monumental breakthrough. Mothers could now save their children with simple household supplies. They just didn't know it yet.
That discovery was there, but it was not disseminated. Most people didn't know how to prepare oral rehydration solution and how to administer it. So we decided basically to go from house to house and teach one woman in every household how to make oral rehydration fluid at home.
Brack trained an army of instructors. Teaching the formula took minutes. Half a liter of water, 1 pinch of salt, and a fistful of sugar. Teaching 13 million women took about 10 years. Child mortality rates were cut in half. The success of the campaign gave Brack the confidence to scale up all its projects.
I mean, once your organization has been to every household in rural Bangladesh, then of course the entire country becomes your backyard, and you could really think in terms of expanding all other kinds of programs throughout the nation.
Look, the children are pooping in the water and the people are using it. Is that acceptable?
Today, Brack has become one of the largest non-governmental organizations in the world. It employs over 90,000 people and runs programs that reach over 100 million. In the last 3 decades, its health volunteers have helped cut the nation's birth rate in half and improved lives throughout Bangladesh.
One of the great challenges in public health is taking a program that you've shown to succeed in a community and scaling it up to a whole country. Brack shows how it's possible. They franchise, they replicate, they use in effect the same model that McDonald's used on hamburgers. Instead, they're saving people's lives.
Brack is largely self-funded, with profits from its commercial line. It channels the handiwork of rural artisans into its department stores. It runs food processing plants and banks. But its focus never wavers from the place where it began. Here in the villages, Brack is transforming lives.
Brack, and this is such an ultimate example of finding homegrown solutions among peers and then disseminating it and sustaining that total culture change and doing it essentially for free. Okay. So how do you become a positive deviant? 5 tips for becoming a positive deviant. Ask an unscripted question. Don't fall into the typical paths of small talk, the weather, or gossip, or whatever, biggest recent scandal. I've learned to do this over the course of my career with lots of students. Ask a different kind of question, something that's not necessarily weird or awkward, but just something different than the typical talking points that people lapse into in conversation. Number 2, count something. Oh my gosh, in data are those whispers of anomalies and patterns and discoveries, and they're in there if you collect data, qualitative and quantitative. That's where you see the people that have figured something out, or you see a pattern, or you find the signal through the noise. Number 3, get in the habit of writing. I make you all in this class and other classes write weekly papers. I think a lot of your thinking gets synthesized and sharpened and refined when you actually have to put it into an essay, and you have to write out your thoughts and resolve the conflicts in the data or in the arguments made by different writers or different theories. When you have to write it out and sort of resolve it in your mind, by the time it comes out in the essay, your thinking is much more advanced. Number 4, just personally and professionally, don't complain. Now, if there's something that's wrong, that's unethical or immoral, something that's profoundly unjust or dangerous, definitely speak up. But this is different. This is, don't become and don't join the people that in every organization, in every department, in every school, in every cohort, there's always some numbers of people that just, that's their MO, is to complain. Avoid them because it's toxic and it's morale sapping. And it's lame too. Number 5, once you've done all these things and you've seen the data and you have more insights, risk changing something. I've changed my courses so much over the years, and it's humbling to look at reviews and look for patterns and look for things that students comment on or note. But if you see the patterns in there and they're spotting something that's missing in the syllabus, or there's a reading that's too old, or there's a weakness in one of the lectures, or there's something, change it. That's the beauty of healthcare, of education, of any field. There are opportunities to change something. Now, if your attitude is, well, this is the way it's always been, and this is the way my predecessors did it, and I'm just going to keep doing it because it's the safest route, then you won't make the reforms and the innovations that really make things better, that make classes better, school better, hospitals better, health systems better, public health policies better, all come from doing all of these things. And then just in final summary, this commencement address by Atul Gawande highlights what a lot of people think about all areas of our society, that there are good hospitals and bad hospitals, and good schools and bad schools, and good organizations and bad organizations. And of course, there is variation on all kinds of characteristics. But what he highlighted in this commencement address is that when they did research on good hospitals, safe hospitals, and bad hospitals, the hypothesis was that there were hospitals that had lots of errors and problems, and those were the bad hospitals. And conversely, there were good hospitals that didn't make any mistakes or made so few that they were rare. And what the research found over and over again was that that wasn't so much the case. There were errors and mistakes and problems and failures at all the hospitals they looked at. What was different about the good hospitals were that the good hospitals had sunk a lot of resources and time and investment in Plan B, Plan C rescue protocols for when there was a patient error, when there was a mistake, when there was a failure. They didn't freak out and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, they knew they were going to make mistakes. Mistakes are part of being human beings. And they had backup protocols. They had backup systems that caught the mistake. They had backup protocols for how to remedy and rescue the mistake. So their error rates weren't significantly lower. But what they did have at a much higher rate were rescue plans, reform plans, plans for fixing the mistakes and the accidents that happened. And you can apply that to your life very much as well. And that's why I didn't have one for class, but I think it'd be really good. And I see the value of having a failure resume. All of us have these standard resumes and our standard LinkedIn profiles that sort of list essentially all the things that have worked out for us and all the acceptances and all the accolades. But, there should be a flip side. These are all the schools that rejected me. These are all the articles that they didn't accept. These are all the jobs I didn't get and I got rejected from. These are the people I dated that didn't work out. Because it would be so much more honest and real about the way people's lives are. And I don't know why. Maybe it's just efficiency. We don't have time to have that kind of holistic view of people when they apply to colleges or when they're applying for jobs. We need to have a stripped down, streamlined, distilled take on who you are. But the problem is that is just so terribly misleading and so dishonest. All of us have had rejections, things that didn't work out, failures, accidents. And just like Atul Gawande outlines here, just like the hospitals that figure that out, acknowledge that, and then work on changing things when things haven't worked out, you can definitely apply this to your life and learn from it. And it sounds kind of cliche, but that really is the wisdom you pick up over time. And I do think in college and grad school, there's such a fear that you're going to make a mistake or fail a test, or it's not going to be perfect, or you're going to disappoint. And then eventually you realize that that's just ubiquitous. It just happens. It's just part of living in a broken world and with fellow human beings. So number one, acknowledge that it happens. Number two, and again, it sounds kind of cliche, but again, the best hospitals have figured this out. Abdul Gawande figured this out. Mistakes are going to happen. You're going to come up short. Things are not going to pan out the way you want. Plan A and plan B are just going to sputter and then fail. But it's learning from them and coming up with rescue plans and adjustments and modifications. And the next time I teach a class, or the next time I use this textbook, or the next time I use Zoom, or the next time I have TAs, I'm using examples from my classes, modify it. Listen to what people say. Be willing to analyze what goes well and what doesn't go well on a patient floor or in the emergency room or in a class, and look for ways to make things better. And have this relentless desire to make things better, and they will. So it's been a pleasure teaching you all. I'm sorry I had to end online with Zoom, but I look forward to seeing you all again in person in the future. Keep in touch. Bye-bye.
You have stopped screen share.